In the majestic halls of the Prado Museum in Madrid, one painting stands out not just for its masterful brushwork but for the haunting story it conceals. Diego Velázquez's Las Meninas, painted in 1656, captures the innocence of a golden-haired child standing at the center of Spanish courtly life. Her name was Margarita Teresa of Spain. At just 5 years old, her gaze captivates viewers with an intensity that transcends centuries. Her delicate features and elaborate dress suggest a life of privilege, luxury, and affection. But behind the beauty lies a tale of horror and loss, shaped by the merciless logic of dynastic ambition. Margarita Teresa was born on July 12, 1651, in the Royal Alcazar of Madrid. She was the product of generations of obsessive inbreeding, born to King Philip IV of Spain and his niece, Mariana of Austria. The Habsburg dynasty, into which she was born, had pursued bloodline purity with a zeal that defied reason. Royal family members married their own nieces, cousins, and uncles in a desperate attempt to preserve the family legacy. Margarita Teresa's own family tree looked more like a closed loop than a branching lineage. From the moment of her birth, Margarita Teresa was seen not as a child but as a political pawn. She was celebrated not for her individuality but for her potential role in preserving a decaying empire. The Spanish Habsburgs were facing crises on every front: military defeats, economic collapse, and a fading global influence. To Philip IV, his daughter was not merely a blessing, she was an opportunity. Her future would be shaped not by her desires but by the empire's needs. Her mother, Mariana of Austria, had herself been a victim of the same cruel tradition. Married to her uncle, King Philip IV, at the age of 14, she had been shipped from Vienna to Madrid to bear children for the Spanish throne. Mariana watched helplessly as her daughter entered the same cycle. She knew exactly what awaited Margarita Teresa: unbearable expectations, a life in service of the family's continuity, and a body used as a vessel for political reproduction. Though surrounded by opulence and courtly beauty, Margarita Teresa was never truly free. Her education was carefully curated to prepare her for the life of a royal bride. She was taught languages, court etiquette, music, and religious devotion. But none of this was meant to enrich her mind or nurture her soul. It was all intended to make her a more valuable marriage commodity. Her piety would appeal to the Austrian court. Her fluency in German would smooth the transition. Her beauty and charm would make her more desirable in the dynastic marketplace. What makes Las Meninas so heartbreaking is that it captures the brief moment of freedom Margarita Teresa ever knew. Painted by Velázquez when she was 5 years old, the masterpiece offers a frozen glimpse into a life before it was entirely consumed by duty. She stands at the center of attention, not yet aware of the destiny laid out for her. The court artists, servants, and even the king and queen, seen reflected in a mirror, surround her. But for a fleeting moment, she exists outside of obligation. To understand Margarita Teresa's tragic fate, one must understand the family that created it. The Habsburgs were one of the most powerful dynasties in European history, ruling vast territories from Spain to Austria, the Netherlands to the Holy Roman Empire. Their power was built not on war alone, but on strategic marriages that kept land, power, and influence within the family. But what began as shrewd politics devolved into dangerous madness. By the 17th century, the Habsburgs were already notorious for their practice of incestuous marriage. They believed that diluting the royal bloodline with outsiders would diminish their divine right to rule. So they married their nieces, cousins, and uncles with shocking regularity. Over time, the genetic consequences of this practice began to manifest in horrifying ways. Children were born with debilitating deformities, severe mental illnesses, and chronic health problems. The infamous Habsburg jaw, a protruding lower jaw that disfigured the face and made speech difficult, became the family's most recognizable trait. Philip IV, Margarita Teresa's father, was the embodiment of the Habsburg legacy. A man born of incest and committed to its continuation, he was physically frail, emotionally distant, and politically desperate. By the time Margarita Teresa was born, he had already lost several children in infancy and knew the dynasty's future was on shaky ground. His hopes turned to her. The Spanish court quickly began examining Margarita Teresa for her reproductive potential. Physicians assessed her body as if she were livestock, evaluating her development, strength, and beauty. Her health was not her own concern. It was a matter of state. At the same time, diplomats across Europe began discussing her as a potential bride. By the time she was 6, her future had been more or less decided. She was to marry Leopold I, her mother's brother, and thus her own uncle. The Austrian branch of the Habsburgs needed an infusion of Spanish legitimacy, and Margarita Teresa was their solution. The Spanish court saw the union as a way to consolidate Habsburg power and keep it from slipping into foreign hands. No one asked what Margarita Teresa wanted. No one cared. Her wedding, celebrated with great pomp and glory, was a tragic procession masked as a triumph. At the age of 15, she was taken from the only home she had ever known and sent across Europe to a new life in Vienna. The journey was arduous, the emotional toll immense. The Spanish court had written extensive instructions on her behavior, her wardrobe, even the exact phrases she should use when speaking to her new husband. She was a bride in name, but in reality, she was an instrument. Arriving in Vienna, Margarita Teresa entered a world just as suffocating as the one she had left behind. The Austrian court, though grand and disciplined, was even more rigid in its expectations of royal women. Margarita Teresa was now Empress of the Holy Roman Empire, but her position came with little autonomy. Her primary purpose was to produce heirs. Her husband, Leopold I, was an awkward, pious, and deeply conservative man. Though he reportedly felt affection for his young bride, he saw her chiefly through the lens of duty. Their marriage quickly became dominated by a relentless cycle of pregnancy and loss. Margarita Teresa endured 6 pregnancies in just 6 years. Most ended in miscarriage or infant death. Her body, never strong to begin with due to her inbred heritage, began to deteriorate rapidly. Contemporary letters and medical reports document her increasing frailty. She suffered from chronic pain, exhaustion, and depression. Yet she was expected to perform her duties with a smile, attending state functions, hosting banquets, and maintaining the royal facade. Her moments of joy, if any existed, are lost to history. Despite her failing health, there was immense pressure for her to continue bearing children. Each new pregnancy brought hope for a male heir who could continue the Habsburg legacy. But each loss deepened her despair. Her letters, once filled with the excitement of youth, became curt and mournful. She knew she was dying, piece by piece, and yet the court demanded more. Margarita Teresa's final pregnancy proved too much for her weakened body. In 1673, at the age of just 21, she died from complications related to childbirth. The official cause was exhaustion and a uterine infection, but the true cause was years of abuse, neglect, and the systemic cruelty of a dynasty that consumed its own. Her death was mourned in both Vienna and Madrid, but only in the abstract. She was remembered as a dutiful empress, a symbol of dynastic unity, a beautiful and pious young woman. But the truth is far darker. She was a victim, sacrificed at the altar of empire. Her body had been used as a tool, her mind disregarded, her soul worn thin by obligation. Today, the story of Margarita Teresa survives in fragments, letters, portraits, court records, and of course, Velázquez's masterpiece. Las Meninas remains one of the most studied and celebrated paintings in Western art. But few who admire it understand the full tragedy behind the image. The girl captured in that luminous moment would live only 16 more years, all of them marked by suffering. Her life is a cautionary tale of what happens when politics override humanity. She was born into a system that saw her not as a person but as a vessel. Her intelligence, charm, and creativity were acknowledged only in terms of how they enhanced her marriage prospects. Her body was not her own. Her choices were illusions. Her fate was sealed before she took her first breath. The Habsburg dynasty would continue for another generation before collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions. The very policies that had maintained their power for centuries, incestuous marriage, divine right monarchy, and dynastic absolutism, ultimately led to their downfall. The empire they fought so hard to preserve crumbled from within, a victim of its own blind traditions. But Margarita Teresa's image endures. In Las Meninas, we see not just a princess, but a child suspended between freedom and fate. Her gaze speaks across time, asking us to remember her not just as an empress or a painting, but as a human being. Her story forces us to confront the dark side of royal history, the pain hidden behind the palaces, the lives sacrificed for thrones. She was never free, never truly loved for herself, never allowed to live on her own terms. And yet, through Velázquez's brush, she achieved a form of immortality. Not the kind her family sought. Not through heirs or alliances, but through art. Through truth. Through the power of a single, unguarded moment captured for eternity. Margarita Teresa of Spain, child of empire, prisoner of politics, martyr of bloodline purity, her story is not just a historical tragedy. It is a human one. A reminder that behind every crown is a cost. Behind every masterpiece, a shadow. And behind every golden-haired child, a life far more complex than the canvas can ever reveal. You've just witnessed one of the darkest punishments in history. But many more still lurk in the shadows. So if you dare, subscribe to Torture Vault, where every scream from the past still echoes.